Before the story begins, please note that it explores meaningful themes of family, humanity, and personal responsibility. This content is intended to encourage thoughtful reflection. If you feel unprepared for these themes, you may wish to pause before continuing. The rain fell relentlessly against the tall glass windows of the Oakwood Grill, turning the city lights outside into blurred streaks of color, like watercolor tears sliding down a gray canvas. Inside, the restaurant glowed with warmth and exclusivity. Crystal glasses chimed softly. Laughter drifted between tables. The scent of seared steak and buttered seafood lingered in the air. At the entrance stood Barbara Vanderbilt, 80 years old, wrapped in elegance that could no longer fully conceal the fragility of her posture. She wore her finest navy blue velvet dress, a pearl necklace once belonging to her mother, and soft gloves that trembled almost imperceptibly around the handle of her handbag. She had rehearsed this moment for days. She would walk in with dignity. She would ask for a table for one. She would celebrate 8 decades of survival, of success, power, and endurance. Reality, however, was far less kind. The young maitre d' behind the podium barely looked up from his tablet. His voice was polished but hollow. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Without a reservation. It's impossible to seek you tonight. We're fully booked." He repeated it 3 times, each repetition slower, louder, spoken with a condescension reserved for elderly people presumed unable to understand the modern world. Barbara felt heat rise to her cheeks, not from the cold outside, but from shame, the quiet, burning humiliation of feeling invisible. She glanced around the dining room. Couples leaned toward one another, toasting champagne. Families laughed over shared plates. Friends celebrated birthdays and promotions. Every face belonged somewhere. Every chair was filled by someone who mattered to someone else. Barbara, despite the immense fortune she had amassed by running a manufacturing empire with ruthless efficiency, could not buy the one thing she needed tonight. Company, dignity, loneliness, she realized bitterly, was the only thing money could not negotiate when time began to run out. She nodded slowly. "I understand," she said quietly. "Thank you anyway." She turned toward the revolving door, the rain-soaked night waiting to swallow her again. Her legs felt heavy, as if every step carried the weight of her choices. Who was she fooling? She had spent her life pushing people away, choosing control over compassion, success over affection, and now fate had presented her with the final bill, due in public. As she reached for the door, a sound stopped her, a child's laugh, clear, crystalline, full of life. It cut to the hum of conversation like a bell, pulling her back by instinct alone. She turned her head slightly. Near the window sat a man in his mid-30s and a little girl of about 7. They were not dressed like the rest of the diners. The man, Daniel, wore a simple corduroy jacket over a white shirt, no tie. His clothes were worn but clean. His face radiated a quiet, unmistakable kindness. The girl, Lucy, had messy hair, bright, curious eyes, and a smile that could dismantle defenses without trying. They had stopped eating. Daniel held his fork midair, his attention fixed on Barbara. There was no mockery in his eyes, no indifference, only recognition. Empathy, the kind born from knowing pain. He set his fork down and looked at Lucy. She met his gaze and nodded solemnly, far older than her years. Barbara's hand rested on the cold metal of the door when she felt it, that old instinct that never fades. Someone was watching her. She turned, expecting the maitre d' to ensure she left quietly. Instead, she met Daniel's eyes. He raised his hand, not in farewell, not casually, but with a slow, respectful gesture, inviting her over. Barbara frowned, confused. Did she know him? Impossible. She had withdrawn from public life years ago. Her mind whispered cruelly, "He's mocking you. Everyone pities you." But Daniel stood up. That alone felt like an act from another era. He stepped toward her, weaving past the waiter. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said gently. "My daughter and I couldn't help noticing what happened." His voice was steady, warm. "Our table is for 4, he continued. "There are only 2 of us. It would be an honor if you joined us for dinner. The rain's too heavy for you to leave without eating." Barbara froze. The offer was so sincere it stunned her. She searched his face for cruelty, for some hidden motive. There was none. I don't want to intrude, she stammered, clutching her purse. This is a family dinner. Daniel smiled. That's exactly why, he said softly. We're missing a grandma. Lucy beamed. Daddy says you look like a fairy queen, she added. And queens don't stand by doors. Barbara felt something crack inside her chest. Lucy waved enthusiastically. It had been decades since anyone had made Barbara feel needed. She took one step, then another. The maitre d' opened his mouth to protest, but Daniel's quiet, unwavering stare silenced him. Daniel offered Barbara his arm. As she accepted it, she noticed the elbow of his jacket, worn thin with use. This man had no excess to give, yet he gave freely. That made the gesture priceless. At the table, Lucy bounced in her seat. I like your pearls, she announced. Barbara smiled, truly smiled, for the first time in years. They belong to my mother, she said, and they're called Lucis, just like you. Well, Lucy declared, they give off light. As Barbara sat, something struck her. The girl's eyes, the curve of her brow. Familiar, painfully familiar. What's your name? Barbara asked the man, steadying herself. Daniel, he replied, and this is Lucy. I got a new job today, so we're celebrating. Now we're celebrating meeting you. Conversation flowed easily. Lucy filled the air with stories. Barbara laughed, real laughter, surprising herself. Eventually, she set down her spoon. Today, she said quietly, I turned 80. Lucy gasped and clapped. We have to sing. Daniel motioned to the waiter. A small cake arrived, candle flickering. Barbara stared at the flame, overwhelmed. Why are you doing this? She asked Daniel softly. Because no one should blow out candles alone, he replied. And because my mother always said a shared table tastes better than a solitary banquet. His mother. Something tightened in Barbara's chest. She raised you well, Barbara said. She did, Daniel replied. She passed a few months ago. He spoke of poverty without shame, of dignity without bitterness. Barbara felt ill. And your father? She asked. Daniel shook his head. Never knew him. My mother said he came from a different world. He didn't stay. Barbara saw it then. His jaw, his eyes. Roger, her son, dead 10 years. What's your last name? She asked, trembling. Taylor. The world stopped. Ellen Taylor. The maid she had fired. The child she had erased. The grandson she was dining with. And Lucy, Roger's eyes staring back at her. Guilt crushed her. When Daniel spoke of a rich woman who ruined his mother's life, Barbara tasted ash. The cake arrived. She blew out the candle and made a wish for redemption. She offered Daniel work, carefully, respectfully. He accepted. When the bill came, Daniel paid. Money comes and goes, he said. Memories stay. Outside, Lucy hugged her legs. A chauffeur arrived. Shock crossed Daniel's face. Barbara fled before explanations were needed. That night, she made calls. The next morning, Daniel arrived at the brownstone, a masterpiece of neglected wood. It's yours, she said, if you want it. And for the first time in decades, Barbara felt hope, not as an owner, but as a grandmother trying to repay an unpayable debt. The days that followed blurred together in a rhythm Barbara had never known. Each morning, instead of boardrooms or bridge tables, she arrived at the old Brooklyn brownstone, carrying a thermos of coffee. She sat on a folding chair while Daniel worked. She watched his hands, steady, precise, reverent, restore what that others would have torn out and replaced. He treated every beam as if it carried a memory worth preserving. And it did. Sometimes Lucy came after school. She sat cross-legged on the dusty floor, drawing pictures while humming to herself. Her laughter filled the empty house, echoing off the walls like music long denied entry. Barbara joined her on the floor, ignoring the ache in her knees. She read Lucy's stories, bought her shoes a size too big so she could grow into them, gave her toys she had kept locked away for decades, things once meant for Roger. She was building memories 30 years too late. And the secret grew heavier every day. One afternoon, during a lunch break, Daniel asked a simple question. "Mrs. Barbara," he said gently, "you talk about your son a lot. The one who owned these toys. Where is he now?" Barbara stared at the bare wall. "He left," she said. "A long time ago. I was harsh. I thought success mattered more than love. I lost him." Her voice cracked. Daniel placed a hand on her shoulder. "As long as we're alive, there's still time to fix things." She almost screamed. "You are him." The house neared completion. The wood gleamed. The brownstone breathed again. Barbara carried the deed in her purse. She planned to give Daniel the house. Payment disguised as gratitude, inheritance hidden behind pride. She never got the chance. The storm returned the way it had begun, rain pounding against windows. Barbara grew dizzy. Her purse fell. Its contents spilled across the floor. Lucy rushed to help. From the open wallet slid a photograph, black and white, worn thin. Lucy stared at it. "Daddy," she said, "this man has your face." Daniel smiled, then froze. He turned the photo over. "To my beloved son, Roger, 1985. The room collapsed. "Who is this?" Daniel asked, voice trembling. "Why do you have this photo?" Barbara tried to stand. Failed. The truth rose, unstoppable. "You're Barbara Vanderbilt," Daniel said, horror dawning. "You destroyed my mother's life." Barbara nodded. "Yes." She placed the deed on the table. "This house is yours. For Lucy. For you. Please." Daniel recoiled. "You think you could buy forgiveness?" he shouted. "My mother died because of you." He took Lucy in his arms. "We don't want your money. Or your name." The door slammed. Barbara was alone again. Only this time, she understood why. She did not call her driver. She sat in the dark, staring at the wood Daniel had restored, and finally understood that forgiveness was not notarized. It was earned. 2 weeks passed. Daniel did not return. Barbara wrote a letter. No excuses, no defenses. Only truth, fear, regret. She admitted Ellen had been better than her. She took Roger's old toolbox and carried it herself to Daniel's apartment, left it at the door, rang the bell, hid. Daniel read the letter. Lucy watched him cry. Inside the toolbox was a note. "These were your father's. He wanted to build things. I forced him to study finance. Don't make my mistake." Daniel remembered his mother's words. Resentment is poison. Forgiving wasn't forgetting. It was freeing the future. The next day, footsteps echoed in the brownstone. Barbara turned. Lucy ran into her arms. Daniel stood quietly. "I won't take the house as a gift," he said, "but I'll finish the job, and you can have dinner with us on Sundays. As Grandma." Barbara nodded, sobbing. Slowly, carefully, they rebuilt. Daniel finished the brownstone, turned it into a workshop and home, paid symbolic rent. Barbara learned restraint, learned to listen. She founded the Ellen Taylor Foundation for Single Mothers, funded apprenticeships, honored the woman she had wronged. When Taylor Woodward Shop opened, there was no press, just family. Barbara lived long enough to see Lucy graduate, to see Daniel thrive. She died holding her grandson's hand. At her funeral, Daniel said, "My grandmother wasn't perfect, but she spent her final years trying to fix her mistakes. And she didn't die as an owner of an empire, but as my grandma." That was enough. This story reminds us it's never too late to change. Forgiveness is work. And sometimes the stranger you invite to your table is the family you